Another edition of Riding Home. Georgia with the Aggies coming to town. Georgia about a two-touchdown favorite over Texas A&M. Dean Legge, Dylan Weber. Dylan, it it might rain again on Saturday, and
Oh, are
that's
you kidding me? I did not see that. Oh
yeah.
God.
We'll just see what happens. It's certainly going to rain Friday night, but this Georgia offense is going to want to probably avoid the rain a little bit just so they can have another normal game. Your thoughts on again Georgia closing practices a few times this week in preparation for what is another big game for the Dogs.
They're just kind of setting that as the norm, I guess, especially late in the season as stakes get a little higher. SEC championship coming up in a couple of weeks, that is clinched, so the stakes are a lot higher now. There's a lot on the line. A loss takes them out of the playoffs and makes that SEC championship, I guess, a little less valuable to them. So they're just trying to keep things as close to the chest as possible, mostly with injuries. That's kind of the time we get to, confirm injuries that Kirby tells us about and see others that he might not have mentioned. But they want to keep that stuff completely in house and kind of just out of the public eye.
For the Aggies, this has been a year of facing a plenty of difficult teams. They've snuck into the rankings for this week, pretty low in the rankings, but snuck in there nonetheless. They've done pretty well against Power Five schools, Texas State, Lamar, etc. Of course, they lost to Clemson by 14 points on the road up there in Clemson. They lost to Auburn at home by 8. A not very good performance against Arkansas for sure in late September. Alabama taking them out by 19. Only a 7-point win over the Rebels on the road, but a win nonetheless. And they played okay against State at home, the 19-point win against them. And then this past weekend, uh, a 24-point win over Carolina, a team that is certainly struggling to find itself, except when
Yeah.
it gets 4 turnovers. What should we really expect from this A&M team? I mean, people are saying, "Oh, well, they're playing better." They are playing better um, than they did, I guess, at times in September. But this
But
still, yeah. Go ahead.
I mean, what are they playing for at this point? I think they've probably lost some motivation, and that's kind of. I don't want to speculate on that too much, but I'm sure they were playing with a lot more passion and fight than against Clemson early on in the season than they are now.
Well,
There was a lot more in front of them at that point
no
than there was
question.
now.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at their game against Clemson to start the season, that you know the lopsided loss to Alabama, not ideal, but that's been the case for A&M the entire time they've been in the league, with the exception of Johnny Manziel game. I mean, I think maybe in 2013 that game might have been halfway close. I mean, one of the reasons why they made the move to Jimbo was because they wanted to move up in the rankings, but that's not happened yet. We're in year 2 of Jimbo, but that's not quite happened yet. But that loss to Clemson, they played around with Clemson for sure, but they were down 17-3 by the half. Um, Mond went 24 for 42 for a pick and then an interception. Actually, a pick and a touchdown, 236 yards. They really did not run efficiently against Clemson. Not that many people have. And then the Tigers had, a, an adequate day offensively against Texas A&M, but these guys still are. I mean, they're more than capable of winning some of these games. They got Georgia and LSU to win to close the season. Getting a win there would change the narrative of their year for sure. But this really, just looking at their season on the whole, this is just not a game Georgia should lose. Period.
No, Georgia's the better team. It's
Right.
but Texas A&M is still a quality opponent, better
Right.
than South Carolina for sure. So it isn't impossible for them to lose this game, but they would have to play really poorly, almost as bad as they did against South Carolina. But it's not a game, and Kirby made this a big part of his post-game presser on Saturday. They aren't overlooking this opponent. I think fans probably are a little bit, just because they beat Auburn. and now they're kind of already looking at the SEC championship. But this is still a game that if you overlook, you could lose a game to Texas A&M. They are still a good team.
That's completely right. You know, the odd thing about A&M, we're 10 games in the season. They've only played twice true road games, which is a little bit strange.
Where at Ole Miss?
Well, they played at Clemson.
Yeah.
The Arkansas game was really not a road game.
It's in Dallas, isn't it?
It's in Dallas. Well, Arlington, if you want to call it that.
Sure.
And then they played Ole Miss. And so, you know, they played, obviously, Texas State and Lamar were at home. They played Auburn at home. They played Alabama at home. Same thing with State. Same thing with UTSA. And same thing with South Carolina. They closed the season with the most difficult close to the season, with the exception of Ohio State. They play Georgia and LSU back-to-back weeks. Those are going to be very challenging games. The Aggies, the other thing too, I mean, they're outscoring Georgia 34 points a game. So that's something to watch. But what we've seen with Georgia is they're killing the clock, man. They're taking away time of possession, generally speaking. Now, they lost that against Auburn this past week, but still came out on top. Auburn was scrambling for sure in the fourth quarter to get back in that game, which they did. Georgia was scrambling to stop them. But I just, man, on the road, the noise, it's challenging to win in Sanford Stadium. That's why we've only seen one team do it here since 2016.
Yeah, it's going to be tough for Texas A&M. I think they're going to really struggle to get things rolling. Their offense is good. Kellen Mond might be the best quarterback they've played. Top or second, I would think, up there with Ian Book.
Yeah.
So that is a struggle for them, but I think their offense, like every offense that's played Georgia so far, is going to really struggle to just get things rolling, even if it is Jimbo Fisher calling plays. Even if Kellen Mond is the best quarterback they've played all year, they're going to have struggles getting stuff rolling in Athens.
It's tough. I mean, George, look, I just wonder what the narrative of this season would be if you don't have that 4-turnover loss to South Carolina for Georgia. I mean, would they be the number one team in these rankings, or would they still be behind LSU?
I think they would still be behind LSU just because LSU has the dominating win over Alabama. I guess it was a one-score game, but they still had, I would say, control of most of that game. I think that would probably push them barely ahead to number one. But I think Georgia would probably be number two with wins over Florida and Auburn.
Mm-hmm. I think so too, and Notre Dame. I don't know. Ohio State's really got a tough road to hoe here coming up this last. I mean, they got 3 ranked games in a row against top 15 teams. You got Penn State, Michigan, and then the championship game, which will be against either Minnesota or Wisconsin, who will both be in the top 15. Certainly the winner will be. So Ohio State's got their work cut out for them. To win the national championship, they're going to have to win 5 games against top 15 teams in a row.
Mm-hmm. And they should win all of those games, but it doesn't make it any easier.
No.
It's still tough to do that. Even if you should win those games, even if you're predicted to win all those games, it's still difficult to win 3 games against 3 good teams.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, what's been so good about Ohio State, LSU, and Clemson, but probably LSU and Ohio State more, is that they should have all won the games that they've won. You know, I mean, there's been no time this season where LSU has had to save itself that I can remember off the top of my head. Can you? I mean,
no, I don't think so.
Okay, so Ohio State's sort of the same way. You know, Clemson had to save themselves against North Carolina. Alabama, you know, with the exception of the LSU loss, they've not had to save themselves. I can't recall, George. Would you call a touchdown win over Florida and a touchdown win over Auburn? I don't think I said Auburn and the Gators, and the way that Georgia beat Notre Dame. I guess the one saving yourself the most there for Georgia would be the Notre Dame game. I mean, Notre Dame was at midfield trying to win that game.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, Georgia's essentially routined everyone that they've played as well.
I don't think they had to save themselves necessarily. They had to more so protect themselves.
Yeah.
but I think they didn't always have the lead against Notre Dame, but they never trailed against
Right.
Auburn. Did they ever trail against Florida?
No. Mm-mm.
Yeah, so they never had to save themselves in that regard because they were always in front. Now, it was close, but I wouldn't say that's saving yourself.
Well, I guess the old save yourself thing. I don't know where Larry Munson would fall on, in that world, but I'm saying that certainly Clemson had to save themselves at North Carolina, no doubt. But even still, with that, and their schedule is the least. They've got the least most impressive uh, wins of the teams at the top. Them and Alabama have both their best wins. Both of them are Texas A&M. Both of those being double-digit wins. But when you look at both, I mean, I don't think Alabama gets into this thing, man. The more I look at it, you're going to need some chaos for Alabama to get in. And
Yeah,
go ahead.
I think they would take probably a one-loss Pac-12 champion
Yeah,
over them.
I think so.
I think they might even take a one-loss Oklahoma or a one-loss Baylor
Well, Baylor would
over
have.
them.
I just, Oklahoma's situation is not super impressive. I mean, when you look at,
No,
Oklahoma's best win is probably over, but well, it is over Baylor. They the blowout wins to start the season where they really did look very good, and they sort of slowed down after the game with Texas. The loss to an unranked now Texas Kansas State team on the road. The completely saving yourself against Iowa State. The 3-point win over Baylor. I mean, some of their wins are tight, which there's nothing wrong with that. But when you compare that to what's at the front, well, I think what would be there's what everybody in college football is going to be watching, and I don't know if the ratings are going to be as high as Georgia Alabama in the past or Georgia Auburn in the past in the SEC championship game. But Georgia LSU, if the chalk holds and we get to championship Saturday, all of college football is going to be looking around saying, this SEC championship game determines X. And that means it determines the SEC champion. It determines how many teams from the SEC get into the college football playoff. It determines, in many ways, who the number one seed is. It determines if Alabama can get in, which both of us are skeptical of. I mean, everyone behind Georgia needs help. Whether you're talking about Bama, Utah, um,
Oregon.
Oregon, excuse
Oregon
me.
is questionable in controlling their own destiny. They could make it. It depends on the committee at that point.
Dude, I
If
don't.
they want out, it depends how much they value
I don't think
the
that
conference
they.
championship.
But if Georgia doesn't lose, Oregon doesn't get in. You see what I'm saying?
I think so too. I think so too.
I mean, if Georgia wins the SEC championship, Clemson wins the ACC, Ohio State wins the Big Ten. Is it your view of the world of college football that the college football playoff will remove LSU in favor of another team?
I don't think so. I think they would put LSU in.
Mm-hmm.
But the standards change sometimes. Sometimes they
Yeah.
come in and they're like, we love the conference championship. You need to win your conference championship. And sometimes they don't.
Here we go.
And so
You're right.
maybe they're like, hey, like the Pac-12 championship is awesome. We need the Pac-12 champion. Now, I don't know about that. Oregon is not better than LSU.
Well, if Oregon were to win the Pac-12, you would have, the biggest problem there is that Georgia, Alabama, Georgia, LSU for sure have defeated Auburn, which is the team that Oregon lost to. Now, it was at the beginning of the season and everything, but results have got to matter at some stage. I mean, like, if is it the best four teams or not? And if we're only talking about, Oregon, LSU, Georgia, Clemson, etc., and they have a mutual opponent, what? Why would you put Oregon in over Georgia and LSU? I mean, LSU's got right now multiple significant wins. They'll have win over a top 10 Florida team. I mean, Florida will be a top 10 team by the end of the year. You've got their win over Alabama. Alabama will be a top 10 team. There's not going to be a lot of teams in college football that have 2 wins over top 10 teams, and they very well could have a win over Georgia. Now, in that case, Oregon would probably get in because that would mean Georgia would be out. But this is a simpler, in a way, this is a simpler moment in college football where you've got the 4 spots and you're looking at maybe about 7 teams. You think 7 is too many or 8? I think the top 4 right now. Then you've got Alabama, Oregon, Utah, and
Utah, yeah.
probably Oklahoma. So let's just call it 9 teams. But
you could throw Baylor in there too. I don't think that. Maybe
I'm not throwing Baylor in there.
Okay.
Who is Baylor's best win?
Could be Oklahoma. It could be. If they
right, but that only removes Oklahoma from the discussion. It doesn't necessarily elevate Baylor. I mean, you look at Baylor's situation, and it's not going to get better. I mean, they close with Texas and Baylor and Kansas. I mean, Texas sucks, so get them out of here. Baylor with a win over Stephen F. Austin, UTSA, Rice by 8 points. They beat Iowa State by 2. Kansas State, they win. They beat Texas Tech by 3. They beat Oklahoma State by double digits. They beat West Virginia by 3. They beat TCU in overtime. They lose to Oklahoma by 3. I mean, beating Texas and Kansas, and then finishing the season at 12 and would that be 12? That'd be 12-1 with wins over every team you played. But the problem is Oklahoma could say the same exact thing. Hey, we won every game we played. Oh, excuse me. Well, they couldn't say that because they can't go back and beat Kansas State, Oklahoma. So Baylor, Who's the best team?
We'll throw Baylor out then.
I mean, but who's the best team Baylor's beaten? It would have to be Oklahoma.
Maybe Iowa State.
Yeah, but in that scenario,
it would be Oklahoma.
And there's no sizzle factor there right now.
No.
Texas not being good really kills the Big 12. No one's going to take Baylor seriously when their best out-of-conference win is either Stephen F. Austin or UT San Antonio or Rice.
Go Roadrunners, man. They're a solid program. They started like 6 years ago or something. They only come up.
It's just nothing there with Baylor. And you and Matt. I know Matt and I sat there and watched that game with them in Texas Christian. It was a disaster.
Yeah, that game was bad.
So I don't know, but I think that the thing that I would say about Georgia going in this A&M game in these final few minutes we're talking. Hopefully it won't rain that much. It looks like the rain's going to taper off during the game, which is fine by me. But if Georgia if that Georgia defense is out there, it's just going to be hard for A&M to score. And this game's in Athens. It's going to be tough, man.
Yeah, it won't be a blowout. I mean, I guess none of these Georgia games have really been significant blowouts right off the bat. But it will be a tough fight at the beginning. Texas A&M is a solid team that Georgia can't overlook. That fans, I think, are overlooking a little bit, but Kirby is certainly not.
No, it's certainly not. I do want to take a look at one last thing here, which is, Texas A&M is about like everybody else in turnovers, not that bad. They have, let me double check that. I was on the wrong metric there. They actually might be a little worse than I thought. They are a little worse than I thought. They've given the ball away 14 times, which is a fair amount. I mean, in the grand scheme of the world, that's not a great number for you to have, but that's not the end of the world. That's only about a little bit more than one a game. For Georgia, that Georgia's turnover margin has been pretty solid, man, because they don't turn it over, it doesn't seem like. And so they continue to climb up these rankings. They've only given away 8 times, 4 times in one game.
Lord.
So the whole season, Georgia's only given it away 8 times, but they've only gotten it 11 times. So that's not great. That might be something that they need to really watch. Of course, everybody's keeping their eyes on LSU. LSU's only turned it over 11 times themselves. They've got it 15 times back. So Georgia and LSU are right on top of each other in terms of turnover margin. That's going to be a huge game. But first, Georgia's got to get past A&M. Dean Legge, Dylan Weber. I'm going to put Kirby's press conference up. You can listen to what he had to say yesterday. Please make sure to subscribe, and we'll see you tomorrow on Riding Home.